Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. Today we have a very distinguished guest. This is the ambassador of Germany to Georgia, Miss Kadenbachma, and she will be talking about a subject of which she knows very well because she has been working for the foreign ministry in Germany for quite a lot of time. I'll just say a couple of words about her. She has studied Romanistic, so we say I think Roman studies, I suppose Romanic studies, and political science in Bonn, and then she worked in many countries for the German foreign ministry, like for example Estonia, Turkey, and since 2015 she has been here as an ambassador. Her specialization, if I understand correctly, is the security and defense policy of the European Union, European security and defense policy. So we would be very much eager to hear about that, but she will be mainly talking about German foreign policy, as far as I understand today, but I'm sure that you will be kind enough to answer our questions related to, I don't know, visa liberalization or related issues, or to have no answer. Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So, good morning. I'm really honored that I can be here today. I think we have tried for quite a while to find a date that's suitable, a date where you are also here, because I remember I gave a short lecture elsewhere once, and then it had to be cancelled because of the strikes. So it seems that everything is fine now. Maybe we wait a small second so that everybody can be seated.
So this is also European integration. We have kind of 15 minutes.
That's perfect. It's the 15 minutes academic.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Strafot რომ მოგზავნეთ თუ შეიძლება დასკვნითო წინარე ადგილები ისე რომ თამამად მოგზავნეთ.
Since I've been already introduced so very kindly, I will just add a little bit. Yes, I have been a diplomat now for 24 years. I joined the Foreign Service right after I have been working for local administration. Then I started 2 years of training in the Foreign Office, and my first post was in Ankara, which at the time it was extremely interesting. It was an entirely different country from what it is now. After that, I was back in then Bonn, because at the time when I started my diplomatic career, Bonn was still our capital, so I returned to Bonn into a building which, because we all knew at one point we would relocate to Berlin, nobody was doing anything in there, and I still remember the day when I was heavily engaged in writing papers on security policy and the new European defense dimension and things, and then suddenly when I tried to open my cupboard, the whole door and everything just fell into my face. So that was how I started in the foreign ministry. After that, I was posted to New York, which was extremely interesting. I was there for 4 years, working with our team on the Human Rights Commission, and then later with our team in the Security Council, and that was the time when there was the whole run-up to the Iraq War. So I was really there when it was very, very interesting, but also I was there when September 11 and the terrorist attack happened, so I witnessed this firsthand, and it was one of the defining moments of my career to realize that you go somewhere. I had just returned from vacation. I told my family back home, look, I'm just going to New York, it's so safe, it's so fantastic, so fabulous, and then the attacks happened and suddenly everything was totally different from how it had been before. So that. Then I went after New York. I felt that something a bit more quiet would be necessary, so I went to Estonia, to Tallinn. At the moment when I arrived, it was the day after Estonia had joined the European Union and NATO. And it was very interesting to see how they were coping with this, now being new members, what they were doing, how they were interacting with everybody else. And it was one of the other defining moments when you see that new countries come. Initially they are very shy, they don't really voice their opinions because they don't really know that they have opinions to certain things. And then after a while they became very interactive and just like they are here now telling us what they think, what they believe we should do with regard to Georgia and all of this. So this was another thing where I witnessed not just something that is static, but a process, how foreign policy developed, how it was shaped, how it changed over time. Then later I worked with our Minister of State for Europe, again on European issues, on all sorts of things when we had the presidency of the European Union, which is always interesting to have and tremendous amounts of work. At least it was before the Treaty of Lisbon, when the European Union changed its structures, its institutions, and it became easier for the presidencies because now we have the EU as an institution that is more assertive, that has its own diplomats, its own delegations. That's it. And then after that I was posted to Tehran, which was an entirely new experience because the culture there, the country, the politics, everything was totally different from anything I had experienced before. Interesting, of course, because Iran is a beautiful country with a rich history, a rich culture and everything. Politics were difficult. And for us it was more difficult because we had imposed sanctions, so that meant that all the German companies slowly left the market, and then there was this very small international community, and it was more and more restrictive, and it was not an easy time. Then I returned to the foreign ministry, once again in security policy, European security policy, and I was involved in all sorts of missions. So the missions that the military missions and the other security missions that the European Union has abroad, one of them is the European monitoring mission here in Georgia. And I was responsible for this mission, and that is how my relationship with Georgia really started. That was when first I came to Georgia to see what is this mission really doing, because every week I got reports telling me basically everything's fine, it's calm, it's stable, it's good. So I thought, okay, if that's the case, maybe there is no more need to have this mission. And then I learned over time that when a report says it's calm and stable, it is not at all how the people who live here really perceive the situation. So you realize that when you do diplomacy, unless you are someplace where you can really get the feeling of how it is very hard. You have to be there to understand. It's not enough to be back home and to sit at your desk and then to decide that maybe this is good or this is not good and this is what we should be doing. You have to go there, you have to talk to the people, you have to get a feeling for the place, you have to visit where things are happening, and that's why we keep embassies. Because that is the job of an embassy, to report what is important, what is happening, to try to evaluate what is happening, what does it mean. And then the people at the desk, they have to get all these informations together and see how this can tie into our overall foreign policy goals. And this is the subject that I'm going to talk about today. Just to finish this, when I was here the first time to see the EUMM, I saw that it is very different to read about this or to actually go to the administrative boundary line and to see what's happening there and to see how you cannot cross and to see the barbed wires. So that makes an enormous difference in all of this. So, and then I also, because I had a friend here at the embassy, I decided, she invited me to come to have a vacation here, a short vacation over our Easter, which is a bit earlier than the Orthodox Easter. I said, okay, so I come, and then she took me to Kazbek. That was my second experience here. So I was there, and I remember the day I woke up in the morning, and there was this whole beautiful, fabulous mountain just in front of my window, and I said, okay, if ever I have a chance to be an ambassador, this is where I want to go. And then, I think for about 2 years, I told everybody in my ministry, one day I will be ambassador here. My minister didn't know about it, my personal department didn't know about it, but everybody else knew this is where I want to go. And then I got this phone call and telling me, congratulations, and I was so happy. And I'm really happy to be here and to be an ambassador here. And I have noted ever since I came here that all the experience I had with regard to foreign policy, all these 20-something years, being in Turkey, being in Iran, being in New York at the UN, helped me to understand a lot of what is going on here and a lot of what is happening here. Because both countries I just mentioned, they are regional players, they have stakes in here, they have shaped parts of Georgian history, so all of this was really helpful. And having a background in security policy, of course, is very important to be here to understand why. What does it mean that Georgia is involved in NATO missions? What does it mean that Georgia is involved in missions of the European Union, that you participate there? What does it mean that Georgia has these aspirations of becoming more integrated? Do we have any kind of similar experience that not just in the EU but also as Germany, that's something that we could use here to help with and to support the Georgian ambitions? And so this is why this is kind of a small culmination of my diplomatic career to be here. And I think a lot of what I have experienced helped me to understand what is happening here and what is the Georgian foreign policy. And so, my subject today is German foreign policy, which is, I think, probably the one subject I know most about, since for 24 years now I have been at a very junior officer and then climbing a little bit up the ranks and assuming more responsibility that I've been allowed to be here. I think now, today, everybody more or less agrees that Germany plays a role in international politics, that the German role is quite an important one, and that we are recognized as a democracy, and that we are as a stable democracy, as a stabilizing factor, and that we are very well integrated into the international community of states. That is today. This has not been always the case. Not only Germany has been divided for a long time, but we had to struggle quite a lot to learn who we are, who we want to be, and what our role should be. After the Second World War, we had to learn to take the full responsibility for the atrocities that had been committed during the Nazi regime and World War II. And the experience of this part of our history is a very decisive factor of the values that Germany today is committed to, and the foreign policy we have adopted, and the foreign policy that is important to us. That we have become a member which is fully accepted of the international community is something that, if we hadn't found our way, if we hadn't taken on this responsibility for what we have done, and if we hadn't had very strong partners willing to support us and to give us a chance, this would not have been possible. For us, it was absolutely crucial that we became integrated, that the Federal Republic of Germany, the western part of Germany, became integrated in the Western structures. We were one of the founding members of what then was called the European Coal and Steel Community, which was in 1951. This was just an economy-related measure, because coal and steel at the time were tremendously important economic factors in Europe. But this union for coal and steel was ultimately the core of what then later became the European Community. The European Community, which now, today, is the European Union. In 1951, nobody, even the most optimistic politician, would never have guessed what would become out of this coal and steel union. So this was when Germany started to kind of emerge from the isolation after the Second World War, and once again got involved into international European politics and to become a part of that. The next step, which is very important and which I think is important for everybody who wants to understand how it could have been that Germany was divided. One part belonged to the western part of the world, the other part belonged to the Warsaw Pact, was that we signed the so-called Paris Agreements in 1954. That was when the western part of Germany got integrated in military organizations of the West, like what then still existed, the Western European Union and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is the NATO. This integration was possible because the world at that time, in 1954, was so that France had big problems in what is that in English? In Indochina. It had big problems. There were the Korean Wars, and the Western countries, especially the United States, believed that Germany had to play a part, that Germany had to take part in the formation of security for the West, because the situation, the world situation, was so dangerous that they could not imagine that Germany would stay out of this and not get involved and not pull their weight. So they wanted us to become members, they wanted us to contribute. That is why our Chancellor then, Konrad Adenauer, decided that Western integration, including military integration, was what Germany had to do. This was very difficult to achieve, not because the other Western countries didn't want it, because in Germany there was very, very big reservations. The German population did not want to get involved ever again in anything military. They didn't want it. They didn't want to have a new army. They didn't want to have any kind of armed forces. They certainly didn't want to be part of any kind of alliance that was dealing with military matters. But the Chancellor believed that this was where Germany's future lay, and he also understood that if they wanted us so desperately, we wanted to get something from them as well. And what the Chancellor wanted to get for Germany was to become a sovereign country again. Because until then, Germany had not been a sovereign country. It was the allies. For the eastern part of Germany, it was the Soviet Union, but for the other part, it was the United States and France and the United Kingdom that decided everything on German foreign policy. Germany had no say at all in that. So that was when the Chancellor said, okay, we are ready to participate, we will become integrated, we will become members of NATO, but for this, we want to have our independence. We want to be a sovereign state. And then, which was also not very easy, this happened. There was then the treaty on Germany, and Germany celebrated in 1955 that we were a sovereign state, like Georgia is a sovereign state now, but there was a caveat. When it came to unification, the question of unification, that the two Germanys got one Germany again, it was the prerogative of the Allies to decide that. It was not allowed for Germany or for the two Germans to decide this by themselves. Plus, all the questions with regards to the whole of Berlin, because Berlin, which is now our capital, then was a divided city. One part belonged to the east, one part belonged to the west, and in order to reach Berlin, you had to pass through the eastern part of Germany, and the west there was totally isolated because everything surrounding it belonged to East Germany, so was under Soviet control, and there was this tiny little part where the Allies were and protected Berlin, and that we had. So also when it came to matters concerning all of Berlin, it was not the German government that was allowed to decide. This decision also rested with the four allies. No, with the three allies, sorry, the three allies and the Soviet Union. So this is very important to keep in mind, because very often when I'm here, I hear people say, why can't we become members of NATO? Okay, there are parts of Georgia that are occupied, but Germany, parts of Germany was also occupied. True, but the difference is Georgia is a fully sovereign country, we were not. And in the treaties, it was written down, and we accepted this, that when it came to unification questions, it was not for us solely to decide. It was not the two Germanys, which is many, many, many years later, in the 1990s, when German unification was negotiated, it was not just the two Germanys that sat on the table, but it was the three allies plus Russia. They were sitting around the table to decide on the fate of Germany, whether we could become united or not. One should never forget this, because even though it was a very friendly, polite fiction by our allies that we were a sovereign country, in this part, in this crucial part of the fate of becoming one nation again, we were not sovereign. We were not the ones who were allowed to decide. Nevertheless, we became so then members of NATO, we became then members of what then became later the European Union, and our foreign policy ever since has always been that we try to prevent conflicts and we help to secure peace in the world. This was always after the Second World War, the most important goal of all Germany's foreign policy and security and defense policy efforts. This is also why we had a very important role to play in 1975 when the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe was created with the Helsinki Final Act. You probably have heard about that, which today is the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, of which right now Germany has the chairmanship. This was, we still believe to this day that the OSCE played a very important role in ending the Cold War, in helping all the countries that were then part of the Soviet Union to become sovereign countries again. This is when it started, and it took a very, very long time. But this is where it began. You have to start somewhere. And as we can see, we have believed after the dissolution of the Soviet Union that now the OSCE has done its task, so it was no longer needed. And then we have realized with the confrontations in Ukraine and with what's now in the Southern Caucasus that the OSCE has a very important role to play. It still has a role to play. It is still an instrument with regard to foreign policy and security policy that is needed. That is needed for Europe and that is needed for the whole, what is the OSCE area. So, of course, for us, for our foreign policy, for Germany, the unification in 1919 was an absolute focal point. It was the major event in our recent history. And last year when I came to Georgia and we celebrated our National Day, it was 25 years of unification and it was a very, very, very big thing for us. I mean, it's half a century and for a quarter of a century. And just imagining when I was young, when I was about your age, I could never imagine that it would happen. I just didn't believe in it because, you know, I have never lived in a united Germany. I couldn't think that this other part of Germany had nothing to, what does it have to do with me? They are far away, I cannot travel there anyway, so what the hell? Why do all the politicians keep repeating? And why was it part of our constitution that it was in our constitution that one day we will be united, and this is our goal. And like I think most young people, I thought, who cares? This is just fiction. And then the process started. And then we saw what was happening. And then there was the day when we were united. And I can still remember when the wall broke. So I was working and I came home to visit my parents. And I opened the door and my mother stood there and she was crying. And I thought, oh God, someone has died. And then she said, the wall is open. And being a German at the time, when someone said the wall, everybody knew it was the wall in Berlin. You were never talking about anything else. Everybody knew, it was clear it was this wall. And so we, like everybody else, we watched television, I think for 24 hours without sleeping. We were happy, we were crying, we were shouting. It was incredible. So that is what happened in Germany and inside Germany. And when it came to the rest, to the other parts of the world, which of course on this very day were kind of a bit on the back burner, but later our foreign minister, you know, Hans-Dietrich Genscher and Edward Shevardnadze, who in the process later became even personal friends, they created the conditions that were necessary for this moment of German unification and of everything that well, that made Germany united again, so that now we can talk for all of Germany once again. And that is also because of this cooperation that Germany's voice can now be heard as the united Germany and not just a part of it, which made quite a difference. Ever since we became reunited and we became unified Germany again, we hear observers and other countries tell us that Germany should please play a more important role, that Germany should take up more responsibility in global politics, and that we should get more involved. We had already thought that we were quite heavily involved, but it seems that other countries had a different perception. But what we did then, that we have realized that yes, we are a big economy, we play an important role in Europe, and it is quite right that we are being asked to take up more responsibility and to not shift responsibility to others, and we are just sitting there and concentrating on our economic growth. So we have decided to do this, and I do not know whether any of you have ever followed German foreign policy, but there is one event every year which is called the Munich Security Conference. This is the conference where everybody who is dealing in security policy matters, every foreign minister, every minister of defense wants to be. Because this is the place where these people can sit together without the media listening in and talk about what is important, what are the questions that need to be answered, what are the problems, what do we see. And at one of these conferences, our president, our Minister of Foreign Affairs and our Minister of Defense, all three of them said, Germany is ready and willing to take on more responsibility. We will be more involved, we will be more present on the international stage, we will do more. And I think it took very few weeks until the crisis over Ukraine broke out, and immediately we did what we had said we would do, we took up responsibility. This is how the whole so-called Minsk process, when this whole Minsk process started, and we became involved in all of the efforts in order to stop the war and to find a solution to all of that. This was practically the first that came out of our announcement, we are going to take up more responsibility in the world. We will be more involved. We will not let others do this. We will do it. We will play a role there. Together with France, we're doing this because one of the very important factors in German foreign policy, if you want to understand why Germany is doing what Germany is doing, we really don't like to do anything just by ourselves. We don't like it. We don't want it. We want to have partners. We want to be part of an international community that is doing something, that is making an effort. Whether it is international organizations, supranational organizations, it's not just Germany doing something, it's Germany together with its partners, it's the community that's doing things. It's very, very important to understand, which is also why sometimes, maybe if there is something where we believe it should go in this and that direction, at the end of the day, if we have a consensus, even if this consensus doesn't completely 100% reflect what we would like to see, still, if it is a joint effort, we still think it's better than if Germany tried to do it all by itself. That is not so the case with other European countries who have a different history, who have a different role, for instance, in New York in the Security Council, but this is unique to German foreign policy, and this is the only way to understand German foreign policy. If one does know nothing about Germany and German foreign policy, knowing that we do something when we take up international responsibility, we do it in a framework, in a multilateral framework. This is what everybody should need to know. That is the only way to understand where we are and where we come from and where we want to go. So the conflict on Ukraine was the one thing. The other is, of course, as you can see, that we take up chairmanship of the OSCE. That also shows that we have understood that there is a challenge and this challenge has to be answered, and we think that we are in a good position to do this, to try to revive many parts of the OSCE that have been kind of dormant for a long time, including the question of
demilitarization?
No, it's not demilitarization. Anyway, so that means that we all have too many weapons and that we should try to kind of, get these weapons down. It's probably something like demilitarization. It's about nuclear weapons, it's about other weapons, it's about verification regimes which is part of the OSCE, that countries can go to other countries and look what about their weaponry, what about their military assets, which happened when I was here. I came in July, and I think in September we had the first international inspection under this regime coming to Georgia. And I happened to be involved because I just hosted them, and I wanted them to tell me what were their findings, and their finding was everything here is proper and exactly as one wanted to be. So just this. So these regimes are still in place, and they are still important, because this is also, of course, confidence building when we know that our partners, they are just where they should be with regards to demilitarization and with regards to their armed forces. Then we all feel more secure, of course. The principal goals and methods of German diplomacy, they have pretty much been the same over the years, ever since the Second World War, because these principles are the ones that make us a reliable partner, that make us consistent. So there are not really surprises coming from German foreign policy. If you understand the principles underlying, the guiding principles of German foreign policy, you can pretty much predict what we will do and how we might react in any given situation. You cannot predict exactly how much responsibility we are willing to take, because this also always depends on domestic factors, which is something I come to a moment later. But the purpose is secure peace, prevent conflicts, and when there is a conflict, trying to get the heat out of this conflict, sit down at the negotiation table and try to find a peaceful solution. Which is, for us, we are really, really interested in promoting dialogue between all groups that are interested, that have stakes in a certain conflict. That is, once again, we try to create a multilateral framework into which these conflicts can then be solved. The other thing is that while the German government decided and our partners want us to be more involved, there is the German public. And we conducted a survey on our foreign policy to ask our citizens and our NGOs, are we doing right? And they said no. Germany is way too involved, Germany is way too militarist, and we want you to stay out of things. And this was something which was a big blow, because when I'm here in Georgia, I'm being told all the time, Germany should get more involved, Germany should have a more active role, Germany should have a more visible military presence also abroad. And the German people tell us, no way, we don't want this, don't do it. It will only make us Germans more endangered. So, you can imagine, you are a foreign minister, and you have the German public, and that says, don't do it. You have the partner that said, but you have to be more active. And now you try to find your way around this. And this is really difficult, because we understand that the world now is so complicated, and there are so many crises, and there are so many wars, open wars with lots of people dying going on, where we have to take a role. We cannot lean back and say, well, we wait until and see who's left. This is not the way. We have to see what can we do, because we see also when there is a big war, then there is a refugee crisis, because these people, they want to flee from war, they want to be some place where they can live in peace. And now they are coming, and then there are many people in Germany and in the rest of Europe, by the way, that are scared because they see millions of people on the move, and they all want to come to us, and they are different from us. And what does it mean for us? Does it mean that our way of life has to change? Are they a threat? Are they potential terrorists? And these are all the questions that have to be answered by the ministries of interior, of course, by also by the ministries of defense, but of course also by diplomacy to see what can we do. And part of the role that diplomacy has to play is to see that the conditions for the people so that they can stay in their homes, because nobody really leaves home if they have a good future there, so that the situation can be improved, that people want to return to their homes, that they want to rebuild their country, and they don't want to stay abroad where they will always be foreigners, because this is not where they come from. People very rarely take their family and then they leave everything behind and go someplace. They do this because they are desperate. For a variety of reasons, they do this because they are desperate. And so diplomacy has the role to play, and diplomacy has to concentrate on helping to make the world, in as much as this is possible, a place where people feel good when they are at home, where people want to get involved in developing their own communities and their own countries and not have to flee because it's not safe to be there. So, which is why we now are dealing with migration crisis, we are dealing with wars, we are dealing with questions of territorial integrity, which is a big question here. We are dealing with how can we prevent crisis, how can we manage crisis, how can we work in post-crisis so that the crisis doesn't come back again, how can we contribute to this new global order that is developing with players who have never been on the world stage but suddenly they are there. What are the opportunities, like for instance China and the Silk Road, and developing Georgia as a hub, as a transport hub and as a logistics hub. On the other hand, also China has their very own interest. What does it mean for us? China is also a political player now. They have interest in certain parts of the world. What does it mean? How can we deal with all of these things? And with all of this, with all these many things happening all over the world, still for Germany the most important and the most important pillar of our policy is that we are part of Europe and we are part of the European Union. This is not negotiable for any government in Germany. This is at the core of where we are, where we stand, and from where we develop everything else that we are doing. So I think I will end it here to give you the chance to answer more questions, to ask questions, or to, if you want me to elaborate on certain things even a bit further. But I don't want you to start fidgeting and to believe that this has been so boring that well, it's better to, it ends very quickly and then we can just walk and do more interesting things. So if you have any questions, I'm happy. If I have the answer, I try to give it to you. If I don't know the answer, I try to warm my way around it a little bit, and then maybe we can see how we can provide you with the answers if I don't have them right now. Good.
Thank you so much. Definitely a very rich and very interesting presentation, and now we should definitely use this opportunity to ask the questions we have to Ms. Ambassador. I'm sure we'll use it. I know that it's always difficult to make the first step, but...
Let me ask the first question. If I were Georgian, what I would do is, okay, if NATO was so important to you, Germany, why don't you let us in? Right? That is what I would ask me if I were you. I will answer you. The world in 1955 was very different from the world as it is today. We have, the NATO member states have made the commitment in 2008 when the NATO summit happened in Bucharest that one day Georgia and some other countries we don't need to talk about now, that Georgia will become a member of NATO. We didn't say anything about might, there is a possibility. No, it says Georgia will become a member of NATO. Now it has to be decided when is the right moment. When is the moment good? When is the window of opportunity there that Georgia can just be a member? And whatever people try to find parallels, how it happened with the Baltic countries, how it happened with Germany itself, the circumstances only ever look the same from the outside, but when you are on the inside, circumstances are always very different. The whole situation of the world politics is very different. The shape of NATO is very different. NATO right now is in a mood frame where they have to look for their own security, for the security of those who are already members of NATO. And everything else after that comes second. And in this particular moment of time, this is not the time where the NATO members are ready to say, okay, now Georgia should become members, because first of all, we have to do other things, we have to do our homework, and then at the same time, we are here, we are present, we are supporting Georgia. Georgia is participating in our missions already, we are helping to train, we built up more capacities here, so that once the political situation changes, then Georgia is ready. There is no more homework to do. It has all been done, all to the good, all to help them, and then they can just move in. And that's exactly what the Baltic countries did. Because people keep forgetting, for 10 years, the Baltic countries have been told you will never be members of NATO. Never, ever, out of the question. The Russians made big noises, and all the others, and that whoever will be, not the Baltic countries. Well, they are members now, because there was a moment in time when the window could open because it was right. That is what happened, but in the meantime, even though they have been told all the time it's not going to happen, they prepared themselves thoroughly, and they never stopped, and they never lost hope, and they never said, okay, we give up, not once. And that is why when the window opened, there was no more preparation to do, they were just there. And that is what we always say, and that is what, because there was just this Georgian security conference for 2 days where many high-ranking people from NATO and others were there, and they all said the same. They all said the same. Prepare yourselves, wait, and have patience. Which I have learned here, patience is not what is the first thing I think about when I talk about Georgians. I wouldn't really think that patience is part of, if there is something like a national character, it's not the Georgian national character. You're not really patient people. But you have to be patient in this, because it is the only way. And important is also never to give up hope, and one day it will be so. So that is the question I would have asked. So probably maybe now you have more questions you would like to ask.
I wanted to ask about the challenges that Europe faces today, because you mentioned German involvement on the international arena, and you mentioned the Minsk group and the OSCE and the Ukraine crisis, and all of those areas are a total mess right now. True. Minsk group is a failure, Europe faces a migrant crisis.
Europe faces a potential Brexit.
Right, potential Brexit. So from a certain perspective, you could argue that Europe is becoming a club that you no longer would want to be a part of, right? So how do we sort of, how do you see the role of Germany in overcoming these challenges to stabilize the European community in general again? Because Ukraine in particular, Russian encroachment, all of these, European identity, which now people are starting to talk about in a very kind of scary overtones, which is a byproduct of the what is termed the migrant crisis, point to a possible dissolution. Is a very strong phrase, but point to a very serious challenge that Europe faces today. And it is in this period that Georgia seeks and has its greatest aspirations for European integration. So how do we sort of balance the two? Is there a way out?
Well, yes, true. Europe right now is in a very, very bad shape, and probably the worst since it has been created. True. Germany is at the core of all the efforts to try to keep it together. And at the very center is, of course, our Chancellor. She's trying really absolutely everything to keep it together. The thing is that when the European Union is being challenged from inside forces and from the outside, and at the same time, while it is trying to define, look, where do we stand right now? What do we stand for? What are our values? Which are the values that we want to defend. At the same time, we are in the process of trying to revitalize or to modernize some of our institutions. So we have to work inside, we have to work on the outside, and we can only make it up as we go along. We know what we believe in, we know that for us it is crucial that the European Union stays together, and we are working for this. But at the end of the day, like with many other processes, Germany is one voice. When it comes to the foreign policy of the European Union, there is this absolute requirement of consensus. So if there is even one single country that doesn't want something, it is not going to happen. And this is not a requirement so far because of the treaties that can be overcome. I've had this quite a lot when I was working on European security and defense. No matter who wants what, if there is even one country, no matter small or big, that says no, then it is not happening. So it is really hard, and this is why I spoke about before on this requirement of reaching consensus, sitting down together. Even if we don't completely get what we would like to get, at the end of the day, if all these countries agree on something, then we have a basis, and from there on we can continue to work. With regard to Georgia's aspirations, well, only Georgia can decide whether they find this European Union still attractive or not. So, because these challenges that affect us, of course, ultimately they also affect the rest of our partners. That's quite clear. The refugee crisis is not going to stop, and it's not going to stop at our borders. It will continue from there. Georgia has to decide, is this still an attractive model? Is this still where we see our future? And if we don't see it there, what is the alternative? What else is there? So that is one thing. And then the other also, do we share the same values? Does Georgia share the same values that are ultimately at the core of the European Union? We have our far right now, of which I'm not proud. France has the far right, and I have yet to meet a French diplomat that's proud of that. Other countries have this. Georgia had them, as we just realized last weekend, to my complete surprise, because I simply didn't know they existed. So they are everywhere. And every country has to find their own way how to deal with this. And I think the only way is to set a good example of what we believe is important. It is freedom of expression, it is accepting that not everybody is like how I am, but this person has still the right to exist and to express their way of life and to find their happiness somewhere, but that we have to be tolerant amongst ourselves and that we try to make life better. And not, I'm the one, I'm important, and the others, I don't care about that. So it's very simplified, of course, but we all have to work on this. Georgia, on the Georgian side, we work within the European Union on that, and we have to wait. We are not looking forward to the referendum in Britain. We still hope that the outcome will make clear that the United Kingdom remains at the core of Europe where it is, because it's a very important partner. And we don't even think about what scenarios might come if it doesn't happen. I mean, personally, I don't think about it. Whenever somebody asks me, I say it's not going to happen, because this is something I don't want to happen. And there we are. We wait. We see. We try to make it up. We try to find common ground on something, and then we go along from there. There is no recipe to say this is what needs to be done, these are the steps, and then everything's fine. It's not going to happen. And I think part of this really is that we have been kind of unprepared for all the crises that are happening. We keep forgetting there is a climate change crisis, which is big. And part of the reason why people are on the move and why they leave their countries is because there is a drought and they cannot survive there. That's one part of it. People keep forgetting this. They think it's just because there is a war and you stop the war, everything's fine. No, it's not. This is one part, this is a big problem of that. I mean, part of this is also here, even in Georgia, because I have seen that the wind is eroding some parts of the mountains, and people no longer find a livelihood there because the animals cannot graze there any longer because there is nothing to graze on. So this is something that on a small scale and in other countries on a different, on a bigger scale, this is affecting us, and we have to deal with this. And so we have to tackle all these different problems all at the same time. And then there is this huge terrorist threat that affects all of us because it happens in the heart of Europe. It happens here. Some of the leaders come from countries where you would never have believed it. They are from the middle, from inside our countries where they are, and we have to deal with that as well. And having to accept one thing, that there is no absolute security, is, I think, the hardest for everybody, because of course we all want to make sure, we all want to believe that our governments are there to make sure that we live in absolute peace and absolute security. And I think having to accept that there is no absolute security, there is no absolute guarantees on anything, and the world is shifting so fast that we all have to try to find our way through this maze there, is very difficult. And I think that is part of why there is this uprise of nationalism and of far right, because these people keep telling everybody, if you stick to whatever, then all the problems will be solved and everything will be good and easy, which of course is ridiculous. It's not true, because the world is more complex than that. It's not satisfactory, probably, what I said, but that is the reality.
There is two rules how you treat a defeated state after the war, right?
There
are two rules how you treat the defeated state after the war.
Defeated state.
Defeated country, yeah. Like, for example, after the Austro-Prussian War, when Austria was defeated, Prussians made them their long-time allies, right? And in my opinion, Germany became a member of the Western world so fast after the World War II because the Western world needed a strong ally and a more stable Germany. And in the Georgian perspective, like, we don't have nothing this big to offer, and many of the Georgians think that Georgia is a big headache for NATO and for the European Union. And this is what I want to ask you.
Where is the question in that?
The question is, like, we don't have these big things to offer, right? Okay, you might wait for us, our progress may be done, everything. We do some reforms, which is sometimes are very unpopular, maybe because of our national things, and I know it's not important, but how do you see the perspective of Georgia and Europe when we don't have nothing big to offer, as many of the Georgians think?
I think that's not quite correct. Because one of the things is, of course, why there are problems here, and when you said this has nothing to do with it because of internal problems, yes, this is really important. If a new member, NATO member, should be one, because that is in the founding treaty of the North Atlantic Treaty, that is, should contribute to the security of the NATO members. That's one, that is at the core. If we don't believe that it contributes, then there is no need for NATO to accept this partner. That's one thing. The other thing is, saying that Georgia has nothing big to offer is not true. Georgia is the only country in this region, the only country that has committed itself firmly to be part of the West. And this is an asset that we do not underestimate at all, on the contrary. This is why Germany alone has poured into this country since 1992, 700 million euros. And this is just Germany. There are all the other European members bilaterally. There is the European Union as the European Union. So it's billions that we have put into this country to help it become stable, to help it become a more prosperous economy, to give a perspective to the people who live here. And we don't do this because we are good people. Of course, we are very good people, but we do this because this is a strategic partner for us, which is of tremendous importance. Georgia's geography is not something that's actually something to be proud of or something, but it's like Germany is in the heart of Europe simply because we are. It's not because we have chosen to be, but this is where we are. And Georgia hasn't probably chosen to be where they are here, but this is where Georgia is. So everything with regard to security, and even also trade in some ways, it has to go through Georgia. There is no other way. If Iran wants to trade with someone, they have to go to Georgia, or they don't go anywhere, because this is the way they have to go. And this goes the same for us. We see that Georgia is a literal state to the Black Sea. The Black Sea is important, it is increasing in importance. It's also increasing in importance for NATO, because things are happening there. So of course we want to have a close ally there, we want to have a partner there. We don't want to have there something that is undecided, some country where they belong to, because we already have literal states in the Black Sea that are not our partners and allies. So we are very much interested. So Georgia has something very, very big to offer, and we are completely conscious of that. It's not about size. It's not about how big this economy is. It's about where it is and what does it mean. Plus, we are completely aware that when this country is completely orientated towards the West, you will develop more the same values as we have. You will become a stable democracy like we all have. It's well underway. There have been some, not all of Georgia's development since the 1990s has been one string going into it. It has been kind of going in circles, and there have been uprisings and unfortunate events, to put it like that. And even now there are some things happening during election campaigns where you believe, looking at Georgia as a foreigner, that if it hadn't happened, we wouldn't have missed it, and I think the Georgians probably wouldn't have missed it either. So these are things like, beating up your political opponents. There are other ways, I think, very much other ways to deal with your political opponents, and all of these things. But we understand very much the value that Georgia has for us, and I think we also understand the value that we have for Georgia, which still doesn't mean that, understanding this, that today you will become a member, but the perspective is there, and together with Georgia we are working on this perspective. It's not that we just lean back and wait and then we look, do they have made all the reforms? Okay, now you can come. That's not how it works. And the overall political situation, how the world is, the shape of the world right now is of course something that plays a role in that. And as I said, right now NATO looks at how can we defend ourselves. You might have read in the media, I do not know if this is portrayed here as well, that NATO suddenly has forward troops in Poland. It's for the first time since Poland became a member of NATO, which is a very big new thing, and there is one country in the north here that's not happy about it. Plus there is more NATO troops now in the Baltic countries, and this other country here is not happy about it either. But this is because they are NATO members, and we have to make sure that they know they are safe. And and then everything else will come step by step. We call it strategic patience. Not easy to achieve, but the only way.
So, no questions? Well, I think we can kind of finish up and wrap up then today's meeting. Thank you so much for your lecture, for being so straightforward and open and detailed in your answers. And I hope this is not your last visit to our university.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.